about Python and how to program stuff in Python. If you don't know who I am, my name is Anthony Rice and I am a coach at Esports Players Club. We are an esports academy located in Tampa, Florida. And if you would like to learn more, please visit our website, www.esportsplayersclub.com. But without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into some Python basics. So first off, the program that I have open here is known as REPL.it. Here's the URL right here if you're interested. The reason why I'll be using this for the course is essentially this way you don't have to download Python onto your computer. If you'd like to download Python on your computer, all you would do here is type in, python.org. Here's the official site right here, and you would come right here to download. You could pick your operating system here. For me, it would be Windows. I would click download this, and it would download the file. Now, I don't need that. I already have Python downloaded on my computer, but if you'd like to download it, that's how. If you don't want to go through this entire installation process here, well, then you're in luck. You would come here to REPL.it. To sign in, you'll just type in REPL.it and click enter, and then you just have to make an account right here and jump right in, just like this. So today, the first thing I'd like to talk about is variable types and data types. So what are data types? Well, first off, let's talk about what Python even is. Python is a programming language, and you can use programming languages to give your computer a set of instructions to follow. Now, because computers obviously have much better processing power than a human, computers can often do simple tasks or even complex tasks much faster than we can. And that's why we employ computers to help us. But in order to have your computer help you, you need to learn how to talk to it. And programming languages are the median in which you can communicate what you need done to a computer or an application. Python is one of the most versatile languages out there, and it's why we'll be covering it in this course. Now, in order to communicate using Python, you need to know the basic forms that Python uses to communicate to computers, right? The basic data types, as they're called, in order to convey information to your computer. So let's go ahead and jump into what those are. So the very first one is a string. This is one of the most common data types out there, and is used across all languages. But a string is essentially a series of quotation or a series of characters encapsulated by quotation marks or an apostrophe. You'll also see an apostrophe here like so. This is normally represented data. It can represent a customer's name, it can represent their age, their email, a whole lot of things, but essentially it's generally stored like this as a string. Okay? The next one is going to be an int value. An int value stands for integer. Integers are whole numbers and their opposites. So that's what an int value is. So examples of integers would be like -3, -2, -1, 0, 1, 2, 3, so on and so forth. These would all be examples of integers. Okay. The next data type we're going to look at is known as a float. A float is different than an integer because a float contains decimals generally, right? Or numbers in between whole numbers, right? So those would include 3.5, 8.97. All of those would be considered floats. And can be used as such, right? Not only that, but 7, 8, and 9 are also considered floats, but they are, but for example, 7.2 is not considered an int. So this is both an int and a float, but this is only a float. So I just want to make sure that we understand that distinction there. The next one we'll look at is a Boolean. A Boolean is a data type that can only take two values. Most times, those two values are true or false. In general, this is what it takes, right? So for example, subscription. If I was checking out a customer's subscription, you could say sub is true, and then the person, waited, 5 months or whatever, then the sub may be false. So they're not subscribed, right? That would be a good example of how you would use the Boolean data type named after the famous, I believe, French physicist, but don't quote me on that. And then the last one I'd like to talk about is the idea of none. None is a data type that stands for non-existent. Now, this cannot be confused with 0, the int data type. Let's go ahead and talk about the differences. By the way, if you are familiar with other programming languages, none is also synonymous with null and nil. It is the same data type, just a different syntax for Python. Now, the difference between 0 and none is the fact that when you type in 0, excuse me, I typed an O here. When you type in 0, that assumes that whatever you are talking about exists. So for example, I could say there are 0 horses in this room, right? That makes sense because horses exist in the world and, you know, there are horses, right? So it's very possible that I could have 1 horse in this room. There's just currently no horse in the room. However, there are none unicorns. The difference being that no unicorns exist on Earth or in our universe that we are aware of. And when you're talking about a program, application, or data model, when you type in none, it means it's straight up non-existent, like a unicorn. And that's the difference between 0 and none. So these are just some basic data types that we need to understand and comprehend. And then the second part to this video is going to be talking all about variables. A variable is a container for a data type. It can vary in value and behaves as the data it contains. We'll talk a lot more about what the second half of that means, but essentially in order to set up basic applications and basic data structure inside of an application, you're generally going to have a variable, for example, customer name, followed by what that is, right? So the customer name in this case will take a string, so this could be Anthony. This is the variable, this is the data or object that's contained, right? Now variables can vary in value and they behave as the data they contain. We'll talk about what that means more later, but for right now just know that variables cannot start with numbers, so you can't do 1 customer. This won't work in most languages because it will assume that 1 is like an int value, so it'll get confused here. So if I printed 1, for example, equal to Anthony, you get an error, which you can see here, right? And then there can also be no spaces in variable names. So generally speaking, you would want to use an underscore, like I did before, so customer underscore name, right? And if now I print the customer name, customer underscore name, I get my name. And that's essentially what a variable is. A variable is a container for a data type. It contains